Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So, for the last little while, I've been talking about the pivotal moment in history that I think we're living through right now. And if you're listening to this video in the future, it is now December 2024. And it is a pivotal moment in history because we've been going through a culture war for the last decade or so, and that culture war has shifted significantly from one side to the other over the last month. And over the course of that time, we've begun to see already various sections of our culture beginning to heal itself. And that's what I'm going to go over today. I'm going to go over how what I normally cover, which is entertainment and storytelling, is going to heal itself within what I would say the near future. Now, of course, in my normal way, I'm going to start with culture itself and then move to storytelling after a while. But that's what I'm going to focus on. How we're going to get back to good storytelling and how the systems of storytelling are going to heal themselves. But if you're looking for good storytelling right now, I have two links in the description and the pinned comment for my 3 graphic novels. There are 2 superhero graphic novels and 1 return to form for low fantasy. You're looking at some of the beautiful art from those graphic novels in the background now. We focus on the merit-based way of telling stories and creating art, and we give our audience what they want. They are stories that are focused around the idea of hero and good old-fashioned excitement, entertainment, and fun. So if any of that looks or sounds appealing to you at all, click on one of those links in the description or the pinned comment and go on over and see if my graphic novels are for you. But back to our topic. And as usual, I'm not going to bury the lead, and as you probably guessed, the way that I think that our society and the institutions within our society, which again include storytelling and entertainment, are going to heal themselves is by divesting themselves of the feminization that has occurred over the last, well, really 75 years, but very specifically the hyper feminization that has occurred over the last 15 to 20 years. And of course, as usual, I'm going to get to that point through a windy, twisty road, starting from someplace which sounds probably ridiculous to most people. And that point is the fact that YouTube has been adding to my watch feed things that I normally wouldn't click on. I don't know if there's a change in the algorithm or what, but they keep on pushing certain channels and things that I had no clue existed before about a month ago. And one of those channels is somebody that many of you probably know. Again, never knew he existed until about a month ago, and it's Asmongold. And quite honestly, I just click on it because it's something to listen to in the background when I'm doing busy work, and it's just right there on my desktop, right there on my feed. But he did a video recently where he talked about several different things that he thinks is going to happen within the near future, which I think are going to play a part in the healing of our culture. Now, I think he's right in one way and wrong, completely wrong in another, but I'll go over that. So his video was basically about the future of employment for really the human race. And his assessment was the fact that you have computers and artificial intelligence and robots taking over a lot of the positions that, well, really stupid people would use in order to have gainful employment. Or at the very least, people who don't need to engage their critical thinking in order to do a job and make money. Those jobs are being outsourced to artificial intelligence and to robots. His example was basically you could have a guy who couldn't think very well with a hammer in his hand, turning small rocks into little rocks, and that would be his livelihood for all of his life. But machines do that now, so there's going to be, in his estimation, a crisis in the near future for people like that, and they make up a large portion of our population. In his estimation, he was talking about half of the population. And he said this is going to cause massive upheaval within our culture, within our society, within really the human race. And he gave one example of what he thought was going to happen in order to try and get out of this positively, and 3 examples of what he really thought was going to happen, which was going to be the negative impact of this entire thing. The positive one was that people and governments will honestly begin to look at the idea of a universal basic income, because people simply won't have jobs, and therefore they'll need something in order to keep them alive. But he really thought that a more negative approach was going to happen, and that negative approach would be a culling, basically, of the human race to about half of what we have right now, so that the people left are going to be the ones that do the jobs that need thinking. And his 3 examples were the fact that there was either going to be a mass sterilization of people in one way or another, so that it cuts down our population, or there's going to be, let's say, a mass pandemic that kills off about half of the human race, or similarly, there's going to be a massive war that is going to kill off a lot of the human race, and therefore the people left after the culling, whatever it is, are just going to be the ones that need to step up and think and will take over those thinking jobs, and that will be what happens within our society. And I realize, by the way, that Asmongold is not a towering intellectual of any kind, but I think he is an example of every man thinking. And I thought about his problem for about 2 seconds before I said to myself, are you serious? Do you not actually get this? Can you not actually see, if you are correct about this happening, can you not see how everything is going to play out? How it's not going to be any of those things? Now, to cut him some slack, I can see in a general way why he doesn't see the very simple solution of Occam's razor applied to this entire thing and how it's going to play out if it does go in this direction. And the reason why he and a vast number of people within our culture, within our world, cannot see the simple solution is because for the last 75 years, people have been taught to think outside the box. And it has become so ingrained in our society that that's the proper way to approach a problem, think outside the box, that no one, or at the very least, very few people can actually think inside the box anymore. So quite honestly, the new think outside the box, if we put that in quotation marks, is think inside the box. Quite honestly, that's what my channel is based on. That's why people love my channel, because I don't have a large number of subscribers, but I gotta say, my subscribers are very, very loyal. And by the way, thank you all for that. But even though I'm thanking you, it's not that you're loyal to me, it's that you're loyal to the way of thinking that I present, because I'm not presenting anything original, quite the opposite. I'm presenting inside the box ideas that no one has heard for the last 50 years, minimum. And people are gravitating towards those ideas and saying, yeah, they make a lot of sense. How come I never heard this before? But again, the point is that he's thinking outside the box, trying to figure out the solution to this problem, when all you need to do is do the easy thing and think inside the box. And you'll see a very simple solution to this problem if it does come to pass. Now, what is that very simple solution to the entire problem? Well, if this entire thing does come to pass, if artificial intelligence and computers and robots take over a lot of the unthinking jobs, so much so that half of our population is put off of work and don't have any way to make a living for themselves, and we need to reduce the workforce by half in order to keep our civilizations running, what is going to happen? How are our civilizations going to do that? It's not going to be by culling half of the population. It's going to be, quite simply, by removing women from the workforce. And it really won't be that hard, nor a game changer for our culture or our society. It will just be going back to the way things used to be. Depending on where you are, you're just going to have your culture lean on its history or its religion or something of that kind, which give historically based justifications why women should stay home and bear children and raise children and run the household, all of those kinds of things. And while that may sound repugnant to some of you who are listening to my voice, maybe even some of the females out there, it may sound repugnant to you, just think of it in this way. What would happen if, let's say, you're married to a man, and both of you are working flat out, trying to pay the bills, both of you are part of the rat race, and someone comes to you and your husband and says, we will double your husband's salary right now until he dies or retires, as long as you, the female, go back to the house, bear children, raise children, take care of the household, take care of your community, and sign a piece of paper saying you will never join the workforce again. How many women do you think would jump at that chance? Quite honestly, I think it's a far bigger number than most of us care to admit. And why? Well, it's like the idea of hero that I always talk about on my channel and what my channel is actually focused on. Many people have asked me in the comments, can there be a female version of a hero which is as much a paragon of virtue as the male version of a hero? And I say absolutely yes, but they are different because males and females are different and they concentrate on their own strengths and weaknesses. And if you do exactly that, if you concentrate on your strengths, that is to say your virtues, and you try to get rid of your weaknesses, which is to say your vices, yeah, even though it's different for men and for women, both men and women can do that. Both men and women can live, as they say, in their virtue, becoming, once again, a paragon of virtue, which is the ancient idea of hero, which has run straight through our society up until about the last 50, 60 years. But the point is, again, Men should concentrate on what men are good at, and women should concentrate on what women are good at, and things will naturally balance themselves out. That's the way heroism for each males and females works, and that's the way our culture works, and that's what our culture is trying to do right now. Our culture is sick, and it is trying to heal itself, and what that sickness is the feminization of our entire society and all of the institutions within our society, which again includes storytelling, includes entertainment. Our society has begun to try to heal itself, and it is going to counter that feminization, which has occurred within our society since the end of the 1950s. And the great thing about all of that is the fact that in order for our society to heal itself, we don't actually have to do very much. We just have to go back to the way that things work naturally. Because here's the thing. The reason why it's sick is because, although there are certainly great examples of female leaders and female heroes throughout our culture and our society, women are not natural born leaders. And therefore, to have the feminine lead our entire civilization has made our civilization sick. And while, as I said, women can become, with a great deal of effort, good leaders, that's not the natural tendency. Because women crave, naturally, security. Men crave, naturally, risk-taking. Society and culture is one that needs to, of necessity, grow and change. And that growth and change is stifled by a mentality of we shouldn't change anything because we need security. And as I said on a video just a couple of weeks ago, the progressive, quote-unquote progressive, idea of a utopian society for the human race is an idea that leads to death. Because if you stop moving completely, if you stop changing completely, that means you're dead. Now, there's a second part to this, which I want to cover and then move into entertainment. But the second part is the fact that, first of all, do I think that even if this happens, even if computers and artificial intelligence and robots take over all of the menial jobs within our society, is it going to mean that there are not going to be menial jobs for people? No, I don't think that's the case at all. I've done plenty of menial jobs in my life. I've worked on various kinds of farms, from tobacco farms to vegetable farms to ranches. I've also worked in unthinking jobs like working at a fish plant, on an assembly line, all of those kinds of things. No matter how mechanized you think you can make things, you always need people. Why? Because people are multitaskers. They can do a multitude of things at the same time or one right after another, and they don't have to be highly trained in order to do so. They might not be as efficient as computers or artificial intelligence, but the ability to multitask is what is going to still have people doing different kinds of unthinking jobs. And quite honestly, this is another reason why women would be taken out of the workforce. Why? Because if the human positions are whittled down to how much you can multitask, well, guess what? Guys can multitask more than women. Why? Because we can also add a physical element to what we can multitask at. And since these are unthinking jobs, that physical component, because we are bigger, have more muscle mass, have more bone density, have more strength, then we can multitask in that direction. So yeah, again, another reason why, if this would come to pass, women would be taken out of the system. And the other point being that if this was to come to pass, guess what's going to happen to the jobs that are left? Well, the jobs that are left are going to become supremely merit-based. That is to say, if you're working against a computer, artificial intelligence that can think much faster than you, against computers that never get tired, what are you going to have to become as a worker? And trust me, I've experienced this as being part of an assembly line. But as a worker, you must become the most efficient thing possible, the most efficient worker possible. And again, this would, to some extent, drain women out of the workforce. Why? Well, let's go back to something I talk about all the time on my channel. Simple biological facts, like the fact that in the human eye, there are M cells and P cells. Men have more, I think it's M cells than P cells, and women have more P cells than M cells. Which means that men, from the time they can first see anything besides blobs of color, which is while you're still a little baby lying on your back, men's eyes are trained towards seeing shapes and movement and filtering out a lot of different kinds of color. Whereas women's eyes are constructed in a way where they can see much more different kinds of color, but that blending together of those colors means they can't see shapes and movements as well as men can, which tends the minds of males and females from the time you are still a toddler on your back, it tends, and they've done experiments on this, they tend the human mind of males to concentrate on mechanical things and of females to concentrate on faces. And the basic fact of the matter is that human beings are not very efficient in the way that they act. But machines are extremely efficient in the way that they act. Therefore, if men and their eyes are trained from the very beginning to think about and study things that are mechanical, then guys have a much better leg up on how to be as efficient as possible. So once again, if we want to boil all of that down to one principle, it is the fact that things within the near future are going to become supremely merit-based, supremely efficient. And this is going to heal things like our entertainment system and the way that we tell stories because, again, for the last 75 years, but very specifically and intensely for the last 15 to 20 years, those systems have become feminized. And by feminized, not me, but the people who have feminized these systems have come out and said that that is anti-merit based. Let me give you some examples from my channel. If you don't know the history of my channel, I've gone over these a number of times. I have multiple videos on each of these. I usually concentrate on the comic book industry as a microcosm of the entertainment industry as a whole. Why? Because it's small, self-contained, I have the most information on it, and the people in those systems really, really like to talk. So again, that's why I use it as a microcosm of the bigger entertainment systems and storytelling systems. And what is true for the small pond is usually true for the large pond of things like movie making, television shows, etc., etc. The comic book system is controlled in North America by Marvel Comics, and it is the big boy on the block, and every other large or semi-large company of producing comics just follows Marvel's lead. And what did Marvel do beginning in about 2009 through 2011? Well, as I said many times, they sent out Joe Quesada, who was the editor-in-chief of Marvel at the time, to go and find Sana Amanat, who had really no experience in creating comics besides doing unspecified things for a very, very small comic company, which basically went bust and had to move its entire operation to, I think, India. He showed up at her doorstep and said, "We want you to come and fundamentally change the way that comics are made." And so they fast-tracked her into the editorial department and then the editor-in-chief department, and she became the vice president of content and character development and was there for about 12 years. And what did she do in order to fundamentally change how comics were made? What was the direction that she was given? Well, the direction she was given was to feminize the entire thing. And this is not just me coming up with this idea or putting so-called 2 and 2 together and getting 4. No, she had a personal podcast, which was the Women of Marvel podcast. It was on for years. I covered it for years. And she would regularly go on that podcast and talk about how to feminize the entire entertainment system. They regularly talked over and over again about how it's now the woman's turn in order to control everything, how the men who are supposed to be male feminists, who are now in charge of these various kinds of entertainment, especially the comic industry, need to step aside and then open the door for these women to take over their positions. And, oh, by the way, take over their positions whether they deserve them or not. Quite literally, one of their anti-merit stances and justifications for themselves being there, even though they couldn't do the jobs very efficiently, was to say, well, no one actually knows how to do the job they're hired to do. Everybody gets in at a basic level and just doesn't understand how things work. You have to, and this was their literal phrase that they said to use over and over again, you have to fake it till you make it. Which again is to say, you never come into a job with the merit necessary to do that job. You only gain that through work experience after you've been hired. Therefore, hire all of these women, even though they don't have the experience, even though they don't have the merit in order to be in these positions. And this wasn't just 1 or 2 mentions of these things. They did entire years worth of podcast based upon a theme each year like this. One of them was allyship. Now, what is allyship? Well, it's nepotism. They basically, again, went an entire year talking about how the comic companies and the other entertainment systems needed to set up systems of interlocking interdependence of the people, the marginalized people, by the way, which included women, in these companies so that they could opt themselves out of anything that was merit-based. That would include, by the way, hiring. They quite literally abandoned all of the hiring practices that would be normal to actually get people into your industry. They never, ever advertised for writers or artists. Trust me, I've done, and I think I'm the only one who did extensive videos about that year after year, looking through the Disney, because Marvel is a part of Disney, through the Disney job postings and the Marvel job postings. Never was there anything for, we need an artist, or we need a storyteller, we need a writer. No. Nor did they continue what they used to do, which was to go to Comic-Cons and look at people's portfolio. It happened every once in a while, but they pretty much discontinued the practice. Why? Because they didn't need any of those things anymore. Why? Because although there's always been a thick layer of nepotism within the comic system to begin with, they just made it 100%. And oh, by the way, it had to be nepotism because the people who worked for Marvel are legally bound to not actually go out and read other people's comics or stories or anything like that, because the company could get sued if the company publishes a similar story to what someone else has written, because they would just say, hey, look, you must have read my book and stole my story. No, they have plausible deniability because they're not allowed to do that. But on these Women of Marvel podcasts, well, actually, the Women of Marvel panels that they would have at each of the large Comic-Cons, they would always talk about, how do you get hired by Marvel or DC? And by the way, these would be people on the panel who worked for Marvel and only Marvel. Therefore, how in the world would they be able to say, this is how you get hired by DC? Well, again, because of the allyship that each of these comic companies would have. They're all going in the same direction. They're all an interlocking ideological monolith. But their point was, how do you get to work for these companies? Was you put yourself out there into the world, usually on the internet, and then someone would read your material and say, hey, look, there's marginalized voice of a kind we don't have right now. And then those people who actually could read those stories, who don't work for the company, would then talk to the people that they know inside the company and say, hey, why don't you hire this person? You can't go look at their stuff, just offer them a job. And that's the way it would work. And they also mentioned just offhand that you can't really criticize the companies if you ever want to get in that position. You know, we're going to scour your social media to make sure you never said anything bad or unprogressive. But again, they would offer these people jobs. Some of them who had no merit in order to be there. I literally listened to this woman offer a job to a 17-year-old girl who was of a marginalized community that they don't have on their staff. As I used to say, it's like Pokemon. They had to catch them all. They didn't have one of her, so, they offered her a job on air. A girl, 17-year-old girl, who had never written anything, never published anything in her life. They offered her a job writing for Marvel. Why? Because she was a female indigenous environmentalist activist. And it's not the only time they hired Eve Ewing to write Ironheart, because she had the same hairstyle as the character. And it doesn't matter if they had no experience and didn't know how to write a comic book at all. Fake it till you make it. So you see how the hiring practice itself was completely anti-merit based, complete nepotism. And it wasn't just the hiring system either. It also included editorial. They did a whole bunch of podcasts where they talked to the editors that worked for Marvel Comics. And they said, quite honestly, straight out, that they just couldn't edit anybody in a story edit way anymore. Why? Because that would deny their lived experience. And in case you don't know, what am I talking about? There's two different kinds of editing. There's copy editing and there's story editing. Copy editing is saying, okay, you spelled this wrong. This is a run-on sentence, stuff like that. They could do that, and they still did that. But story editing is to say, hey, wait a second, you're breaking continuity here. Or this is not the way human beings work. You're going to have to change that. They couldn't story edit anymore. And trust me, they used to story edit. I always talk about the story that Jim Shooter, the editor-in-chief of Marvel when it was at its greatest, the argument that he had with Chris Claremont about writing the Dark Phoenix saga. Chris Claremont wanted Jean Grey to become the Dark Phoenix, wipe out an entire planet's worth of people, and then just have everything go back to normal and she would just be a normal schoolgirl again. Jim Shooter said, no, that's not the way things work. That's not the way human beings work. That's a bad story. He inserted himself as a story editor and said, you can't do it that way. There has to be consequences. But modern Marvel can't do that. And they specifically know they can't do that and don't want to do that. They can't say, well, this is the way human beings work. You got to change this because, again, it would deny the lived experience of these marginalized people, and they only hired marginalized people of one sort or another. That was your golden ticket to get in. But again, this editorial way that they push, this new editorial way, is anti-merit based, is anti-efficiency. Because the whole point, and again, trust me, I've gone through this with the various editors for my manuscript, for my novel. The editors in story editing are trying to make your story more efficient, are trying to make your story more understandable so that the people reading it can get more out of it and like it more, and you can sell more copies. And editors for modern stories can't do that. And thirdly, as I have done several videos on, this also bleeds into the fact that, as I say, a woke story is always an inferior story. Why? Because a story is set up as a rhetorical argument. A rhetorical argument is one wherein you don't have to explain the base principles of what you're arguing from. Why? Because your audience already accepts them. You have to figure out what your audience will accept, use that as your baseline, jump off from there, and tell the story from that jumping off point in order for your audience to understand. And the more basic that jumping off point is, that is to say, something like human nature, which everyone understands because every one of us who is human has a human nature, those jumping off points are what make a story timeless, are what make a story that can jump from one culture to another so that various people in various languages and various times can read it and enjoy it. That's the efficient way of telling a story. But the quote-unquote progressive way of telling a story is based upon the idea that there is no fixed thing. And there is certainly no fixed human nature, but the entire basic principle of progressivism, quote-unquote progressivism, is the idea that everything is made up of a shifting, constantly shifting, changing power politics. That's it. There is no footing that you can have which is actually secure. It's all power politics. It always changes from one moment to another. Therefore, you can't actually have a jumping off point that people are naturally going to understand. Why? Because there is no such thing. Therefore, they must subvert some of the resources necessary to tell a story to actually set up the basic principles of what they're going to jump off from to tell the story. And usually, for a progressive story, there are things like all white heterosexual males are evil. They have to set that up somehow, some way, by using some of the dialogue, using some of the spaces for the art, some way. They have to use the resources necessary to tell the story to set up the basis to tell the story, which again is inefficient, which again makes sure that a woke story is always 100% an inferior kind of storytelling. And the whole reason why I started off talking about Asmongold and what he said and all of the cultural things that are connected to what he said and how they will play out is because we can see this exact thing happening within the comic industry and how it needs to heal itself. Because this inefficiency ties itself quite literally through statements of hundreds of podcasts, ties itself to the feminine and even touts itself as being the feminine itself. They use and have used on these podcasts the basic feminist definition that there is a distinction between power and empowerment. Power is male and is therefore destructive, competitive and therefore destructive. And empowerment is female power, which is meant to symbolize cooperation and generation. But you see how the basic feminist idea that competition itself is evil, but merit and merit-based systems are based on competition. Therefore, merit is evil. Therefore, if you want to do things in the quote-unquote correct way, which is in their minds the female way, you get rid of competition and therefore get rid of merit. Once again, they don't need qualifications in order to be offered a job because they can fake it till they make it. And just as our culture, as I said at the first, is going to rebalance itself, readjust itself, heal itself by getting rid of this false imposed notion that the female should be in control, because it is the supposed better way to do things, just as our society is going to, and has already started really, going in the direction of getting rid of that, so it is that the systems within our society, including entertainment, including storytelling, are going to go in that same direction. That is how they are going to heal themselves. Which, I'm sorry, but if you're a female storyteller, yeah, there's still a place for you, but you're going to have to work twice as hard as a guy. Why? Because you don't have the natural inclinations of a guy that will allow him to be naturally more efficient. And efficiency is going to be the name of the game. Just look at the fact that Donald Trump wants to appoint, or has appointed, Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk to a new department called, what is it called? The Department of Efficiency? They're going to cut the fat. Why? Because good times brought weak men, which is to say feminized men or a feminized society, and now hard times are going to bring back good men. And good men are efficient. Good men concentrate on merit. Good men know what they're doing before they take a job. And as I said earlier on in this video, it's not rocket science. All you got to do is start, once again, thinking inside the box. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. And don't forget, there are 2 links in the description and the pinned comment for my 3 graphic novels. Graphic novels which concentrate on the traditional idea of a hero, a paragon of virtue, with pathos and conflict and breakneck action and adventure, as well as being merit-based in our construction of both the story and the art. So if any of that looks or sounds appealing to you at all, click on one of those links in the description and go on over and order yourself a copy of one of my graphic novels today. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see you later. Bye.